My name is Rusell Watson. I'm an artist. I have a pretty diverse practice, so I work in theater. I don't act much anymore, but that's where I started. These days I direct and design for theater more so. I practice as a commercial media person as well. I do commercial portraiture and graphic design and stuff like that. And I practice as a conceptual multimedia artist, which means that I use media tools in modes that are outside of commercial objectives and entertainment objectives. So I guess more kind of things that you would see in an art gallery, like video loops and things like that are not necessarily based on story, but more based on medium. Yeah. I mean, on a very kind of basic, fundamental level, I guess human beings are just carbon-based electrochemical life forms. No different than rabbits or rats. It's significant to me because I'm from here. Um, there are things that are, I guess, unique about its placement in our, planetary geography in terms of its placement at the equator and so on. And then historically, it has a specificity in relation to globalization. But a lot of that stuff we share with other spaces. I think if we focus on the peculiarities of the space, then yeah, it is special. But we are very much in lockstep with global geopolitics and social development. Well, that's an interesting question. So I'm always apprehensive about asking questions that begin like with that kind of thing of like, are Barbadians X? Because it assumes that Barbadians are one thing. And that is very clearly not the case. I think since independence, and certainly in the last like 15, 20 years, there's been a real drive to create national pride. And in doing so, it has created for people this very keen awareness of what that being Barbadian must mean something very specific. And therefore, if you are going to have that kind of specificity, that you have to be proud of it. But I'm not sure that every Barbadian feels that way or that they should, because I think there's some Barbadians who exist in this space in a way that does not perhaps encourage a sense of pride. And it is very much because of the nature of this space. It's post-colonial nature, it's very stratified class situation, that kind of thing. So I'm apprehensive about saying one way or the other. Um, I guess so. I mean, there are markers of what it means to be Barbadian. I mean, as I said, the peculiarities like accent and diet and things like that are there, but I think, there are questions about the way in which the culture works. And I think those things are, for me, are more interesting than, a pantheon of heroes or a flag or anthem or anything like that. Is like, really trying to figure out how our geography and our history impact the way in which we interact with one another. And whether that is specific is a big question. I don't know that it is so specific that we can say it is uniquely Barbadian, but definitely claiming that it is part of the marketing strategy of the country, right? And so more and more, I'm discovering that, you know, I teach as well, and I'm discovering more and more that young people who would have come up in Barbados when that kind of nation building practice got going, have really bought into it. You know, it's like the idea of Barbadianness is very central and important to how they see themselves. So Caribbean art is really broad, you know, it's a very, very broad spectrum. I think a lot of us, at least in my age group, had to wrestle with trying to claim a specific space for what that meant, you know. It's like, how do you define yourself as separate, or not necessarily separate, but different, unique, you know. This word keeps coming up, unique. I am still yet to put my finger on it, you know. I don't know that it really, beyond the, as I said, the peculiarities of, you know, particular subject matter or cadence or reference, that Caribbean art can really be categorized as something that is monolithic in that way. I find that when we try to do that as artists, we kind of automatically know that it's a problem, you know, that becomes a limitation. It's like, you know, is somebody saying, well, are you a man? And you say yes, and they say, well, can you define that? And they say, well, I guess I could, but do I have to? Because I am that I am that I am, right? And in that self-acceptance and self-knowing, that's where I think creativity starts to really come alive, you know, when things start to get bound by, you know, these strictures of what it should be and what it shouldn't be, it becomes propagandistic, or it kind of leans towards that kind of objective. Yeah, in our context, because of the way our economy is structured, the perspectives of outsiders has a great deal of impact on the way in which we express ourselves. So if we think about market force, right? If you're trying to make a living as an artist, you have to sell. In our context, the historical reference that we draw from as artists is quite horrendous, right? There's a great deal of oppression, murder, rape, disenfranchisement that has occurred in this space. You know, if you subscribe to Hilary Beckel's historical review of Barbados, Barbados is ground zero for the plantation economy. And so the level of suppression that occurred here was pretty significant. There are descriptions of scenes in plantation era Barbados that are just, I mean, astonishing in their brutality. So if you live here and you're an artist here and you're being asked to make work that is traditional or cultural, and you're not pulling from that, then you're making propaganda. You're making something that is trying to persuade people in a particular direction as opposed to really mining what is really there. Now, the people who really sell, let's talk about painting, that sell painting in Barbados, sell abstract work, kind of pastoral scenes and beach scenes and things like that. And the market for those paintings is largely like the villa community, which is largely European and American and white. And so they're not coming to Barbados to be encouraged to think about the historical precedent for their ability to access this place and live in privilege. They don't want to think about that. They want to come and have a holiday, relax themselves, ease off their mind, and go back to wherever they come from, right? So work of any medium that deals with those more contentious and difficult themes will never find a place in that market. So one artist who is selling, you know, paintings of ladies on the beach and sailboats in the background for like $5,000 is going to do well, right? Somebody who is rendering images of the aftermath of slavery as it appears in our contemporary society is probably not going to get those kinds of sales in this market. So this comes the second stage now, where there's another outsider market that does privilege that kind of work, that is really interested in, you know, post-colonial identity and things like that. But that market as well is by and large European, American, and white. So while they may be more, let's call it sophisticated in their taste, they're still perceiving us from the outside. And so what happens for our artists is that we are not talking to the society in which we live. Even if we, you know, find our way to speak more complex truths, we are speaking those truths to an exterior ear or eye. And that, of course, has an impact, because at the end of the day, art is a communication tool. And if you're communicating with a Spanish speaker, you speak Spanish, right? Absolutely. I think human beings, it is part of our kind of basic survival mechanism, right? We write things down, or we render things as a way of examining and rendering the nature of our lives, even if it is something that is as simple as beauty, right? When we encounter something that is incredibly beautiful, we have this desire to fix it, right? My opinion is, my feeling has always been that a big part of that desire is our need to communicate, to commune. And so when we commune, what we do is share. We share information, share experiences. And in doing so, we are looking for ways constantly to do that. So whether it is that I create a song, or create a melody that communicates a certain feeling, whether I try to capture the colors of the most beautiful sunset I've seen, whether I try to chart, you know, the abstractions of human emotion as a way of trying to understand love or anger or jealousy, right? This is what we do as artists. Yes, living on an island, especially a small island, does have an impact, because, you know, just environmentally, the sea is ever present. Until I left Barbados, I did not realize how ever present it actually was. You know, you're never really at any distance from the ocean. And if you understand what the ocean really is, it gives you a sense of vulnerability. And so we kind of always live with this very real and ever-present sense of vulnerability. The sea can be really destructive. to coastline. And if you are a small island, the coastline is a big part of your world, you know. And because in our particular case, the coastline, we're a very flat country. So if the sea was to really get away at Barbados, we would lose a lot. And certainly in our particular moment of climate change, being a small island, you know, if it doesn't have conscious impact on people's life, it certainly has subconscious impact on people's lives. So that level of vulnerability that comes with living in a small island state, especially one that is as precariously positioned as ours, I think has a cultural impact on how we manage risk. So it is quite fashionable to say, you know, Bajans are risk averse. But a couple of years ago, I heard an economist push back at that assumption and say that, you know, it is almost impossible for Bajans to be risk averse because we live in a constant state of risk. So we are risk managers as opposed to, we should see ourselves as risk managers as opposed to being risk averse. And in saying so, I was like, right, what that does in terms of self-concept is that it gives us a lot more agency and leads us to recognize that what we're doing is more about strategies of survival as opposed to avoidance, you know? Oh dear. Well, I don't really see Caribbean people as being separate from the global community. So when I think about us, I think about us as, you know, the human condition, right? So I think what if I do identify, you know, negatives in the Caribbean psyche, I don't really see it as specific to us, you know. Maybe I'm not smart enough or, you know, culturally in touch enough to identify what is specific to Barbadians in terms of the downfall. But, you know, I think about our species and the thing that gets in our way. And I don't know that I can really identify anything. I think we are as flawed as any other creature, you know. It's like we are subject to our appetites, you know. I mean, our situation as a species is that we have to contend with a civility that often puts us at odds with our appetites, you know, and our kind of base needs or lizard brain or whatever you want to call it. And so, you know, in some ways we think too much. But because, I don't know, I am, if that is our flaw, then I personally am deeply flawed. Some of the things that I've noticed, I don't know, like the food is spicy. About us. Well, I think people of African descent that live in the Caribbean have, especially those of us who live in tourism economies, have a very peculiar problem with cultural reference. Because when we make art about our society, the cultural reference that we are encouraged to involve ourselves with because of the market force does not really allow us to go very deep, either deep emotionally or deep historically. And so I think our work becomes really superficial in a lot of ways, you know. Years ago, I made a feature film, and the team that I was working with was a bunch of filmmakers from Barbados. This was when things were really starting to kind of get going. And so we were all young and fresh in the medium. And so after one of these shoots, I was talking with the cinematographer. And, we were just reasoning about film and about, culture and so on. And he said, Russell, do you hear, when you listen to the music of the Caribbean, do you hear the soundtrack of the films that you want to make? And I was like, actually, no, I don't. Because, film, at least the kind of films that we wanted to make and we were making, had a spectrum of emotional experience that isn't really reflected in our music. Our music tends to be, either extremely joyful or extremely mournful. And in terms of the popular music, mournful or, deeper shades of the emotional spectrum are almost invisible, right? Is that you think about, what our creative community produces around our festival culture, and our festival culture is about jubilation. But if I want to make a film that is about sorrow or about loss or about grief, like where do I find the soundtrack for that is, specifically Caribbean, that comes out of this place? And I don't think that we have gotten there yet. So I think in our particular context, that's where we are. Oh boy, if I knew, I would be out front. I don't know what the future holds. There are certain things that I see coming, like hyper-surveillance of the public. I think we are about to have a real problem with data, right? Data saturation, where we have so much mined data that it becomes like garbage. And so, when they were figuring out that they could turn petrochemicals into plastic, they thought that was a good thing. A couple of decades later, we have discovered that actually is not a good thing, and I think we're probably going to go through the same cycle with data mining. We don't really quite understand what the collection of it is really doing to the planet and doing to us as individuals, psychologically. Metaphysically, if you're so inclined to believe in that world. I have some concerns. I'm not so concerned that I think we are, it's going to be the end of the world, because, being a bit of a student of history, I know that the end of the world has been predicted for about a millennia, right? So I think calamities happen, radical change, radical unpredictable change happens, but I don't think we are at the end, a kind of definitive end of our species. I think we are on the precipice of a radical shift, but whether all of us will survive it, I'm not sure,